Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Sony's recently repackaged Terry Riley edition. These are the Columbia recordings that he made in the 1960s. Well, actually, three were in the 1960s, and one later one I think was around 1980. A lot of people don't really know anymore who Terry Riley is. He's still around. He's still making records. He had a cult following, you may say, in the 60s because he was one of the founding fathers of minimalism. What was minimalism? Well, like many things, it's a convenient term. It's like saying, what was Impressionism? And the closer you look, the less impressionistic it tends to be. And minimalism is kind of like that. It was the use of, well, let's put it this way. See, I have trouble describing it. It was a tributary of the classical music avant-garde. When I was in college, even in the late 70s and early 80s, I was working at the radio station WJHU. I became classical music director of the radio station there eventually, and we had classical music, and we had jazz, and we had rock. It was, an everything station, a student radio station at the time. Now it's part of Maryland Public Radio, but at the time, that's what it was. And then there was a category called weird music. Nobody was quite sure what weird music was. It was anything, or progressive music. Sometimes it was called. There was progressive rock, but this was sort of broader than that. It was progressive music, weird music. It was Brian Eno. It was Terry Riley. It was all kinds of unusual and experimental stuff that lived on the cusp of what classical music and rock music and electronic music and progressive jazz, all of those things, were kind of mixing. It was an exciting time. And that began that sort of idea, the mixing of genres, and the idea that, the academic serial avant-garde was like sterile and worthless, but going back to just classical music the way it used to be was also not an option. And introducing elements of popular music, elements of Eastern music, elements of Indian music and other cultures and African music. And all of these things could create something new. And Terry Riley was at the nexus of all of that. He studied Hindu music. That was his principal field for a while. He played multiple instruments, keyboards, saxophones, and all kinds of stuff. And he began, he was heavily influenced by John Coltrane, by Art Tatum, by classical music as well, of course. All of these things fermented and percolated. And out came minimalism, using some of these techniques as a way to treat very simple, very approachable, very listenable materials that operated in a somewhat non-Western format. In other words, they were of indeterminate length. They were extremely not narrative or tonally directed the way symphonies tend to be, or works in sonata form. Each piece was sui generis. It was its own unique structural kind of universe. And so we got this. And it was really kind of bold of Sony to go ahead and do it at the time that they did, because it was a remarkable new, fresh approach to music in Western culture. It really was. And so you get a very nice, solid booklet talking about each of the works, and, with pictures and things and stuff like that. And they all look, terribly serious. Who's that? I don't know. It's Terry Riley and somebody. Who cares? Anyway, here are the 4 albums. First, there is the iconic work from which, all minimalism derives. In C. It's in C, in case you were worried about that. It's in C major. The piece consists of 53 musical modules, which the musicians can pick up and play and repeat essentially at will. There are some directions guiding, when things should change and, when to start and stop elements. But basically, there's a lot of free improvisation. So no two performances sound the same. There's no fixed orchestration, but the music is all composed. How it fits together, well, that's fluid. And that's what makes the piece wonderful. This is the iconic original version or recording or whatever that Sony made with Terry Riley's participation. These are all original jackets with original microscopic notes, which you would probably go blind trying to read. That's why it's a good thing that we have this nice big fat booklet with all the, discussions and things like that, because this is impossible. So that's the first one. The next one was, let's see, what's this one? A rainbow in curved air. This and actually this next one too, which was Church of Anthrax. I think it has a lovely title. These are largely improvisations. Riley improvising in various ways and with various other people, he's a master at that sort of thing. He learned it from his Indian mentors and his jazz mentors and all of his mentors. They are extremely attractive, largely very listenable and quite beautiful in places. So there's that. And then we got this thing, Sri Camel. Sri Camel is actually kind of cool. This came later. His style evolved. He evolved as an artist, as a composer. I think the music in Sri Camel is a little bit more long-breathed, perhaps a little bit more. I like things that tend to get written down, that have a little bit more shape to them. So it sort of has shapes, and it's quite lovely. So anyway, this is the fourth of them, and all I can say, it's indescribable. I mean, some of the music is entirely electronic. Some of it uses overdubbing and taped loops that are incorporated into the overall, improvising surface. There's all kinds of stuff going on, but it is quite special and a real moment in the history of Western music and the history of classical music and quite a few other musics besides. So if you're curious, this is really a good way to get acquainted. These 4 discs, they are all really important milestones in the creation of a new way of listening to Western classical music. It's interesting, though. I find it kind of interesting that classical music, I just have to say this, it's like the English language. The English language is a vacuum. It just hoovers up words and things from other languages and other cultures and sucks them in. And, that's always been one of the things about Western culture generally, that it's receptive. It's receptive to influences from other cultures. And sometimes that's politically controversial. Some people call that, appropriation, God forbid. I call it growth, evolution, and open-mindedness. I think it's a good thing. And this kind of music is as open-minded as it gets. But it gets categorized, thought of as progressive classical music, because all of the musics that it appropriated, that it took things from, are too limited to incorporate the wider vision of what this is. Rock music is a thing. And although there's progressive rock, and although there are rock operas now and long, there was Emerson, Lake and Palmer, there was, these concept albums, that some of which were marvelous. Rock itself, with its short little song thing and constant rhythm stuff, has a hard time getting beyond those limitations. Jazz is limited by its harmonic vocabulary, always has been, and by it being essentially improvisational. So that means that its handling of form is always going to be rather loose. The non-Western musics, to the extent I understand them, Indian music particularly, it's based on improvisation, but improvisation within very, very strict parameters, particular scales, particular rhythms. You don't do those things, you don't have those musics. Of course, there are now fusion works in those cultures as well. That I know too. So I don't want to make too big a point of it. But I just find it interesting that classical music is the stuff that, music of an experimental type, or music that is a fusion or this sort of eclectic range of styles gets lumped with. Something to think about while you're listening to this. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.